Ardennes Forest, December 1944. The morning air hangs heavy with frost and silence. A pale sun struggles through the fog, touching the black trunks of pine trees that rise like pillars into a white void. Somewhere beyond the mist, rifles whisper. Private Harold Green presses his cheek against the cold steel of his M1 Garand. He's 21 years old, from Kansas, just another farm boy who once shot tin cans off fence posts. Now, his breathing is slow, measured. Every sound matters. The crunch of snow, the click of a safety lever, the faint scrape of boots against frozen earth. Across the ridge, a Waffen-SS sniper waits, trained, decorated, confident. He studied the manuals, memorized wind drift tables, and believed no ordinary soldier could ever match him. Then one sharp crack splits the stillness. The sniper never fires. The legend of the German marksman begins to fracture, not from myth or propaganda, but from the calm, practiced hands of ordinary Americans who had learned that accuracy was not born from prestige, but from purpose. And as the fog thickens over the Ardennes, the war's most dangerous illusion begins to fade. Before the Ardennes froze into a deadly forest maze, the myth of German marksmanship had already taken root across Europe. Since the 1930s, the Third Reich had built an army on precision, mechanical, psychological, and human. The German soldier was trained to see his rifle as an extension of his body, a symbol of discipline and control. Among them, the Waffen-SS stood at the pinnacle, men selected for endurance, fanaticism, and elite weapons mastery. German training fields from Bavaria to East Prussia echoed with rifle reports long before war erupted. Instructors drilled recruits endlessly in prone shooting positions, wind estimation, and range finding. Firing at 300 meters wasn't an achievement, it was routine. The Karabiner 98K rifle, a bolt-action descendant of decades of Mauser engineering, was revered for its precision. Each soldier cleaned it with ritual-like devotion. When war began in 1939, Wehrmacht and Waffen-SS units swept through Europe, and their efficiency seemed to confirm the legend. French, Polish, and later Soviet soldiers reported being cut down by single, accurate shots, the unseen marksman on the ridge, the sniper in the ruin. The German reputation grew not merely from propaganda, but from early battlefield reality. This mastery was woven into their ideology. Marksmanship symbolized control, the perfect fusion of man and machine. It was the soldier's proof of superiority. By 1942, the Waffen-SS sniper schools in places like Oranienburg and Dresden had developed specialized programs that rivaled the best in the world. Recruits studied ballistics, camouflage, and optics. Their rifles, fitted with Zeiss or Hensoldt scopes, became instruments of psychological warfare. Every German sniper's bullet carried the message that training and bloodline triumphed over numbers. Yet behind this confidence lay a limitation, the system's obsession with the elite. Precision was treated as a privilege, not a standard. Only selected shooters received scopes, and only those who met the SS's strict ideological and physical demands were allowed to train as marksmen. It produced exceptional snipers, but only a few. By contrast, across the Atlantic, a different philosophy was forming. Before the United States entered the war, shooting was already embedded in American culture. On farms, ranches, and small-town ranges, young men learned to shoot not from ideology, but from necessity, hunting, competition, or recreation. Marksmanship wasn't sacred, it was ordinary. When the U.S. Army expanded in 1940, it inherited this grassroots skill. Training camps from Georgia to California were filled with recruits who already knew how to handle a rifle. But what transformed them wasn't just familiarity, it was standardization. The United States armed its infantry not with a bolt-action rifle, but with something revolutionary, the M1 Garand, a semi-automatic weapon capable of firing 8 rounds in rapid succession without cycling a bolt. Where the German rifle fired 1 precise shot, the American could fire 3 in the same time, all accurate, all deadly. At first, German intelligence dismissed it. Reports from North Africa and Sicily were treated skeptically. They believed such volume of fire would waste ammunition, that precision could never come from speed. But by 1943, those reports grew harder to ignore. Captured German officers noted the uncanny accuracy of U.S. riflemen, men who fought in squads, coordinated through radio, and maintained fire discipline despite the chaos. American soldiers didn't need telescopic sights or years of elite training. They were trained to hit what they aimed at, fast, consistently, and under pressure. Still, on the Eastern Front, the Waffen-SS continued to perfect its doctrine. German instructors taught that a single marksman could suppress entire enemy sections if he remained unseen. And in open fields or urban ruins, that tactic worked, until they met the Americans in Normandy. By mid-1944, after D-Day, both armies began to collide directly. Waffen-SS units like Leibstandart and Das Reich, hardened on the Eastern Front, now faced divisions filled with American mechanics, farmers, and clerks, ordinary men who had turned into disciplined riflemen. The Germans entered believing their precision would shatter the chaotic fire of mass-trained troops. But something unexpected was about to happen. The fields of Normandy would reveal that the ordinary American soldier, armed with industrial reliability and instinctive skill, could match, and often surpass, Germany's finest. And as both sides prepared for the bitter battles that followed, the myth of the elite marksman began to meet the reality of democratic firepower. By late 1943, the American Army had transformed from a pre-war force of undertrained volunteers into a machine of precision and speed. Its strength lay not in centuries of military tradition, but in the relentless logic of production, standardization, and adaptability. While German training emphasized the individual expert, American doctrine built the expert out of every individual. Every soldier, no matter his background, was expected to hit center mass at 300 yards and maintain fire under pressure. The M1 Garand was the equalizer, simple enough for mass training, advanced enough for elite results. At Camp Perry, Camp Roberts, and Fort Benning, rifle qualification became a cornerstone of identity. Instructors drilled recruits under shouting winds and blistering heat. They practiced from kneeling, from prone, and from standing positions. Accuracy wasn't optional, it was mandatory. Yet the tone differed sharply from German training grounds. American sergeants pushed with humor, competition, and camaraderie. There was no mysticism, only the clear, democratic belief that skill could be taught, not inherited. Meanwhile, the German system struggled with attrition. By 1944, after years of brutal combat on the Eastern Front, Germany's sniper corps was bleeding out. Replacements were rushed through shorter courses, equipment was scarce, and the High Command's fixation on elite units became its weakness. The Waffen-SS divisions deployed to France and Belgium still carried the aura of invincibility, but inside, the cracks were visible. Many of their best marksmen were gone, lost at Kursk, Stalingrad, or Kharkov. Their replacements were often young, zealous, and less experienced. The myth of precision endured, but its reality was fading. The Americans, on the other hand, were improving with each battle. After Tunisia, Sicily, and Salerno, riflemen had learned to adapt to terrain, weather, and enemy tactics.
They learned to fire in pairs, to communicate through gesture and instinct. By the time the first American divisions rolled into Normandy in June 1944, they carried not just better weapons, but better systems. German field reports from Normandy described something unsettling. Patrols of ordinary U.S. infantry were returning fire with deadly accuracy, not from trained snipers, but from every foxhole. The speed of American shooting shocked many German observers. They wrote of masses of fire, but what they saw wasn't chaos, it was coordination. The M1 semi-automatic rhythm created a constant storm that masked deliberate aim. German platoons, accustomed to spotting individual marksmen, couldn't isolate a single source. In engagements around Saint-Lô, Caen, and the Bocage countryside, the clash of doctrines became visible. Waffen-SS units relied on hidden sharpshooters to pin down American advances, but the Americans countered with fire discipline and maneuver. When one squad came under sniper fire, others flanked, suppressing every possible window or tree line with overwhelming accuracy. The myth of the invincible German sniper began to erode one engagement at a time. Back in Germany, however, propaganda refused to acknowledge this shift. Newsreels still glorified SS sharpshooters picking off untrained enemy soldiers. Yet captured letters from the front told a different story. Snipers complaining about the storm of American bullets and the near impossibility of survival once detected. And as the Allies pushed east, the psychological balance shifted. German soldiers began to speak of the M1 Garand with a mixture of respect and dread. Its distinctive ping when the clip ejected became a sound both feared and hated. By autumn 1944, in the forests of Luxembourg and the Belgian frontier, this new reality solidified. Waffen-SS battalions regrouped, preparing for one last major counteroffensive, the Ardennes, later known as the Battle of the Bulge. Their commanders believed that surprise, weather, and fanaticism could once again give them the edge. They would advance through dense fog, rolling snow, and shattered towns, facing what they still saw as an army of amateurs. Yet the men they faced, from the 99th Infantry Division, the 2nd, and the 101st Airborne, were no longer amateurs. They were ordinary soldiers who had learned to fire faster, think quicker, and work as one. The stage was set for one of the war's coldest revelations, when elite German marksmen would discover in the frozen silence of the Ardennes that ordinary Americans could outshoot them.
When the armies met again in the closing months of 1944, the old myth still lingered that German precision, honed through centuries of martial culture, could not be matched by an industrial army of civilians. Yet in the ruined villages of Belgium, under the icy stillness of pine forests, that idea began to unravel. The truth of what happened there can only be understood through its angles: the human, the technological, and the doctrinal. The human angle, the ordinary marksman. The average American infantryman in late 1944 was not born into war. He was shaped by it. His background was civilian: farmhand, mechanic, truck driver, clerk. But his discipline was forged by repetition and fear. The M1 Garand, heavy and unromantic, became his closest companion. In his hands, it was neither art nor symbol. It was survival. Unlike his German counterpart, who had been trained to see marksmanship as an elite pursuit, the American rifleman approached it as practical craft. He learned to shoot in rhythm, not ceremony. He understood his weapon's recoil, its trigger reset, its 8-round timing. That mechanical intimacy became his edge. Letters home from American riflemen reveal an unpretentious confidence. "You just keep your head and squeeze," wrote one GI from the 84th Infantry. "You don't have to be fancy. You just don't miss." On the German side, many Waffen-SS sharpshooters entered combat expecting psychological superiority,
convinced their discipline and precision would suppress enemy morale. But as battles dragged into days of mud, snow, and exhaustion, they found themselves matched shot for shot by young men who had learned the same patience and steadiness under far less privilege. By the time of the Ardennes offensive, even seasoned German officers admitted the American soldiers' individual accuracy was no longer something to dismiss. Reports from 1st SS Panzer Corps described steady, rapid, and concentrated rifle fire that prevented maneuver and caused heavy casualties despite cover. The legend of the superhuman marksman was looking human after all. The technological angle: rifle versus rifle. If ideology shaped training, technology determined survival. The duel between the Karabiner 98K and the M1 Garand was one of the most defining contrasts of the Second World War. The 98K, introduced in 1935, was a marvel of craftsmanship, a bolt-action rifle firing 7.92mm rounds with exceptional range and power. In the hands of an expert, it could strike accurately at 800 meters. But its limitation was mechanical. Each shot required manual cycling after every discharge, precious seconds lost in close combat. The M1 Garand, adopted by the U.S. Army in 1936, changed everything. Its semi-automatic system allowed 8 rounds to be fired in quick succession without manual cycling. The shooter could stay on target, correcting his aim mid-fight. General George S. Patton famously called it the greatest battle implement ever devised. In theory, the 98K remained more accurate at extreme distances. But in practice, amid mud, fog, and trees, the M1's faster, steadier fire proved decisive. It was not the rifle of the sniper, but the rifle of the soldier who refused to miss the second or third shot. German field reports reveal grudging admiration. One Waffen-SS platoon commander in the Ardennes wrote, "Their rifles fire like machine guns. They waste no bullets. It is impossible to move between trees when they are watching." Optics, too, played a role. German snipers had high-quality Zeiss scopes, but few rifles to mount them on. American units, meanwhile, distributed the M1C and M1D sniper variants late in the war, but by then, even unscoped rifles were producing results comparable to precision shooters. Reliability sealed the difference. In freezing conditions, the 98K's bolt could freeze or jam. The Garand, though imperfect, continued firing after being dragged through mud or snow. That reliability, multiplied across hundreds of thousands of soldiers, turned average shooters into lethal ones. Technology had democratized marksmanship. And with every engagement, the Germans who once laughed at factory-made rifles realized that the industrial rifle, in practiced hands, could outshoot the handcrafted one. The next angles would reveal how tactics, teamwork, and psychology deepened that shift, and how the Germans themselves recorded their disbelief as the battles turned against them.
The tactical angle: fire discipline and teamwork. German infantry doctrine of the 1930s emphasized precision through hierarchy, a system built on specialization. Snipers, machine gunners, and riflemen each had distinct roles, operating under the assumption that coordination flowed from the top down. This worked beautifully in structured offensives and set-piece engagements where units could rely on well-rehearsed tactics. But in the chaotic landscapes of the Western Front, hedgerows, forests, villages reduced to rubble, such rigidity began to fail. The American approach was the opposite. Every squad was trained as a self-contained organism, capable of independent decision-making. When contact with the enemy occurred, there was no waiting for orders from higher command. Fire was returned instantly, accurate, overwhelming, and coordinated. The M1 Garand was designed for this doctrine. It rewarded initiative. In a 10-man squad, the combined rate of fire from Garands could equal that of a light machine gun section. American soldiers learned to suppress enemy snipers not with random bursts, but with timed, disciplined volleys. In the Ardennes, this philosophy proved decisive. Waffen-SS Marksmen, accustomed to paralyzing Soviet or British units with long-range fire, discovered that American squads didn't flinch. Instead, they responded with precise counterfire from multiple angles, forcing snipers to retreat or relocate. German field diaries captured this frustration. One SS soldier wrote, "They shoot too well from men who are not trained as snipers. Every movement brings their fire." This difference wasn't luck, it was doctrine. U.S. commanders such as General Omar Bradley and General J. Lawton Collins believed in decentralized control. They encouraged platoon leaders and even privates to make battlefield decisions. Combined with superior logistics and communication, this empowered ordinary soldiers to act with lethal precision. Fire discipline, once a German hallmark, had become an American strength. The enemy perspective, disbelief, and adjustment. As 1944 turned into 1945, the shock within German ranks deepened. Intelligence summaries collected by the Oberkommando der Wehrmacht, or OKW, began to reference the unexpectedly accurate and heavy small arms fire of American infantry. These reports were often dismissed by senior officers who clung to the myth of the untrained enemy, but on the front lines, the illusion was already gone. Captured letters and interviews after the war reveal an evolving tone, from confidence to grudging respect. One Waffen-SS sniper taken near Bastogne reportedly told his interrogator, "You shoot like we used to, before we ran out of men." It wasn't just the rifles, it was the attitude. German soldiers had been raised to see the rifle as a badge of honor, a mark of elite identity. American soldiers saw it as a job, one to be done well and without pretense. This stripped-down practicality unsettled their opponents. In battle after battle, German sharpshooters found that surprise no longer guaranteed success. In the fog of the Ardennes, in shattered villages like Foy and La Glaise, American soldiers demonstrated near instinctive counter-sniper tactics, using tracers, grenades, or even baiting shots with helmet decoys. What once terrified enemy troops was now met with cunning precision. Reports from the 12th SS Panzer Division Hitlerjugend noted unusually high sniper casualties when engaging American infantry. Their commanders were forced to reassign marksmen as ordinary riflemen to compensate for losses. For the Germans, this reversal was more than tactical, it was psychological. The notion that ordinary soldiers could match or surpass SS elites eroded morale. Propaganda had built the Waffen-SS image on invincibility. The battlefield now proved otherwise. And yet, in this disbelief lay a grim respect. Many surviving SS soldiers later admitted admiration for the calm professionalism of their opponents. One recalled, "They were not loud or careless. They fought like men who knew their rifles would decide the day." By winter's end, the German faith in their own superiority had fractured. The Americans had shown that training and technology, when combined with adaptability, could dismantle even the most disciplined myth. That realization would crystallize in the blood and snow of the Ardennes, when, at last, the two philosophies of warfare collided head-on.
Ardennes Forest, Belgium, December 16, 1944. The air was still before dawn. Then, at precisely 5:30 a.m., the stillness shattered. German artillery erupted across a 70-mile front, hurling shells through the fog toward unsuspecting American lines. The Battle of the Bulge had begun. Hitler's last desperate gamble to split the Allied front and seize Antwerp. Among the attacking units were some of the most feared formations in the German arsenal: 1st SS Panzer Division Leibstandarte Adolf Hitler, 2nd SS Panzer Das Reich, and 12th SS Panzer Hitlerjugend. They carried not only tanks and artillery, but the reputation of precision. Elite marksmen, veterans of the Eastern Front, men convinced they still embodied the martial superiority of the Reich. Their opponents were not elite paratroopers or armored aces. They were mostly ordinary infantrymen from the 99th, 106th, and 28th Infantry Divisions, thinly spread, under-equipped, and unprepared for a winter assault. The Germans expected panic. Instead, they met fire. From the first engagements near Lanzerath Ridge, small American outposts responded with steady, surgical accuracy. German patrols advancing through snow-draped clearings were cut down before they even saw their targets. The Waffen-SS believed they were facing entrenched machine guns. In reality, it was groups of ordinary riflemen using M1 Garands firing in sequence, one after another. Each Garand cracked with the rhythm of discipline. Each shot found its mark. At Hansfeld and Bullingen, the Waffen-SS struck again, confident they could overwhelm by speed. But even as American lines buckled, pockets of resistance fought with astonishing marksmanship. Sergeant Leonard Lunny of the 99th Division recalled later, "We just fired until they stopped moving. You didn't think, you just shot clean." For German assault units, this was something new. Their forward observers reported unexpectedly high accuracy and heavy losses to rifle fire. They assumed they were facing hidden snipers. They weren't. They were facing the new face of industrial precision, soldiers whose rifles needed no scope to deliver death at 300 yards. As the offensive deepened, the fog thickened, ideal conditions for SS snipers. They crept into tree lines, setting up overwatch positions. For hours, they hunted shapes through the mist, but when they fired, the response came instantly, coordinated, fast, and brutal. Within seconds, Garand fire swept across their hiding places, forcing withdrawal or death. By December 19th, reports from 5th Panzer Army noted increasing sniper casualties. German units were stunned that even under artillery barrages, American counterfire was immediate and accurate. It wasn't chaos. It was muscle memory. In towns like Saint-Vith, Stavelot, and Bastogne, U.S. riflemen became the backbone of every defense. They fought in white camouflage, rifles cradled in frozen hands, firing from doorways and ditches. The M1's rapid crack echoed between stone walls like the heartbeat of a machine. German units advancing street by street found themselves pinned not by massed guns, but by disciplined individual fire. When the 2nd SS Panzer Division tried to flank Bastogne, they met elements of the 327th Glider Infantry Regiment, men without winter gear, outnumbered nearly 3-1, yet their shooting was methodical. German accounts describe terrible accuracy from single houses and immediate suppression from invisible defenders. By now the myth had inverted. SS snipers who once inspired fear now found themselves hunted. The Americans, through repetition and instinct, had turned every soldier into a marksman. The Germans could still hit at distance, but distance was gone. The forest closed around them, the fog thickened, and every tree line hid an American rifle. At Elsenborn Ridge, one of the battle's most crucial defensive lines, U.S. troops held their ground for weeks under relentless attack. Their fire stopped multiple armored thrusts. General Walter Model himself noted bitterly that the Americans fire with a precision and calm unusual for green troops. Those troops were not green. They were practiced in training fields, in Sicily, in Normandy, in every forgotten skirmish where they had learned that survival depended on hitting first. The elite Waffen-SS Marksmen, who once defined precision warfare, now found themselves facing an army that had made marksmanship ordinary and unstoppable. And as snow continued to fall, the myth of German superiority began to melt away.
By December 21, 1944, the Ardennes was a wasteland of smoke, snow, and wreckage. The German advance had driven deep into the Allied lines, but the cost was rising fast. The fog that was meant to shield them now trapped them, turning their own marksmanship into an illusion. Every open space, every tree line became a killing ground.
At Elsenborn Ridge, where the American 99th Infantry Division held firm, German attacks came in waves. Machine guns rattled, mortars thudded, but it was rifle fire that decided the fight. The GIs worked in rhythm, 2 firing, 2 reloading, 2 spotting. Their M1 Garands, coated in frost, kept cycling flawlessly. The SS troops attacking up the slope expected to close the distance and overwhelm. Instead, they were caught in intersecting fields of fire so tight that entire sections fell in seconds. Afterward, captured Germans would insist that the Americans must have had machine guns hidden in the trees. They could not believe that what they had faced were ordinary riflemen. At Bastogne, where the 101st Airborne held out under siege, the story repeated itself. Fog limited air support, artillery ammunition ran low, yet the riflemen endured. German marksmen tried to pick them off from ruined barns and upper floors, but the counterfire was immediate and devastating. An American private described it bluntly. "You'd see the muzzle flash, and 5 of us would shoot at once. There was never a second shot from them." For the Waffen-SS, who had built their identity on the idea of being the most disciplined shooters in the world, this was more than defeat, it was disorientation. Reports from Kampfgruppe Piper, the spearhead of the 1st SS Panzer Division, spoke of high losses to aimed small arms fire and extraordinary reaction speed among American infantry. Piper's men were supposed to slice through scattered defenders. Instead, they were pinned one hedgerow at a time. In the northern sector, elements of the 2nd Infantry Division and 23rd Engineers fought a series of small battles near Krinkeltahauker. The terrain was tight, thick woods, narrow paths, snow up to the knees. Waffen-SS units tried to flank through the forest, using veteran snipers to suppress defenders. The plan disintegrated within minutes. The Americans fired in patterns so tight that German movements became impossible. For every shot fired by an SS sniper, dozens of Garand rounds answered. American after-action reports noted that enemy snipers rarely survived more than one engagement. For all their training, the Germans could not adjust to the sheer volume and accuracy of coordinated rifle fire. What they saw as chaos was in reality an orchestra of calm, trained instinct. By Christmas Eve, Piper's armored spearhead was surrounded and isolated. His men abandoned their vehicles, retreating on foot through the woods. Survivors later told interrogators that they had never encountered rifle fire so precise, like 1,000 hunters in the trees. At the same time, in the south near Clairvaux and Wiltz, American rifle companies regrouped and counterattacked. Many had marched for days in snow and hunger, but when they engaged, their shooting was relentless. They fired in unison, short bursts of controlled aggression. The Germans, exhausted and freezing, returned fire sporadically. Their bolts jammed, their scopes fogged. As Allied reinforcements poured in, the Americans began to push the enemy back. The climax of the Ardennes offensive was not marked by tank duels or artillery barrages, but by the steady pulse of infantry fire that refused to break. In January 1945, when the fog finally lifted and Allied aircraft returned to the skies, the German dream of turning the tide was over. What remained in the snow were the bodies of men who had once believed themselves untouchable. Captured German officers were asked about the fighting. One replied simply, "Your soldiers shoot too fast, too straight, and without fear." The Waffen-SS's final great offensive had been blunted not by overwhelming technology, but by the precision of ordinary men, by farmers from Iowa, miners from Pennsylvania, machinists from Detroit. The Germans entered the Ardennes convinced that American firepower was brute force without skill. They left understanding that it was something far more dangerous, organized, disciplined, and human. The myth of the elite rifleman had met its reckoning in the frozen woods of Belgium, not by chance, but by a generation of soldiers who believed that mastery was not inherited, it was learned. And as January's thaw began, the last echoes of rifle fire faded beneath the distant drone of Allied bombers, marking the moment when Germany's final illusion of battlefield superiority finally broke.
When the snow finally melted in early 1945, the Ardennes was unrecognizable. Entire forests were torn apart by artillery, villages flattened, and roads lined with wrecked vehicles half buried in ice. What had begun as Hitler's last grand offensive ended as a desperate retreat. For the German High Command, the shock ran deeper than the defeat itself. The Battle of the Bulge had cost them over 100,000 men, killed, wounded, or captured. Elite Waffen-SS units that had once been the pride of the Reich returned in fragments. Their marksmen, once mythologized as the embodiment of precision and will, were now a dwindling handful of survivors. Post-battle assessments painted a grim picture. Reports from 1st SS Panzer Corps and 6th Panzer Army described unexpected losses due to small arms fire of unusual accuracy. The same phrase appeared in multiple documents, sometimes underlined in disbelief. The Germans had assumed that the American strength lay in machines, not men, but the Ardennes had proven otherwise. Captured officers told Allied interrogators that they had underestimated the technical skill of American infantry. One SS major confessed, "We thought your soldiers were careless with ammunition. Now we understand they only miss when they choose to." For the Americans, victory came at an equally brutal cost, over 80,000 casualties. Yet among the survivors, a quiet pride emerged. Many had fought without air cover or resupply, surviving on snowmelt and ration scraps. They had held because they trusted one another, their rifles, and their training. After the battle, investigators from the U.S. Army's Infantry Board collected data on rifle performance. They found that the average American rifleman achieved hit rates above 70% in engagements under 300 yards, an astonishing figure given the terrain and weather. German hit rates, though higher at longer ranges, had fallen drastically in close-quarter fights. The analysis confirmed what the soldiers already knew. Speed and consistency beat theoretical precision. In field hospitals and captured command posts, testimonies painted a vivid contrast between the two armies. German prisoners described American rifle fire as constant and unnervingly accurate. Others admitted that snipers no longer dared to fire twice. "They found us too fast," said one captured marksman near Malmedy. "We never believed they could shoot like that." That disbelief became one of the unspoken casualties of the Ardennes. The psychological dominance that the Waffen-SS had once enjoyed, their aura of inevitability, was gone. Across the Allied lines, commanders recognized that something profound had shifted. The U.S. infantrymen, long overshadowed by tanks, planes, and generals, had proven that the war could still turn on the precision of individual hands. Newspapers back home praised the frozen heroes of the Bulge, but few understood the deeper significance that the myth of elite European soldiery had been broken by the very soldiers it mocked. When the front stabilized in February, American units began collecting abandoned German rifles. Many of the Carabiner 98Ks they found were still immaculate, scopes intact, barrels spotless, but left behind by men who no longer trusted them to win the fight. At the same time, the Americans were already adapting lessons from the battle.
Training manuals emphasized rapid reaction, counter-sniper tactics, and the importance of every rifleman understanding his weapon intimately. Instructors began calling it the Ardennes standard, a term used quietly in depots and shooting ranges to describe the calm, steady confidence of soldiers who had fought and survived the snow. The legend of the Waffen-SS Marksmen would live on in German post-war memoirs, but even those accounts carried a note of respect and sometimes awe for the opponents they had faced in the woods. The Germans entered the Bulge believing that elite skill could overcome mass. They left it knowing that discipline, equality, and technology had rewritten the rules of modern war. And in that revelation lay the foundation of a new era, one where the rifle no longer belonged to the few, but defined the many.
As winter faded into spring, the U.S. Army advanced through the Rhineland and into the heart of Germany. For the men who had fought through the Ardennes, the next battles felt strangely easier. The psychological wall that had once separated the average GI from the elite Waffen-SS was gone. Letters home reflected it. "They're good shots," one private wrote, "but they miss more now, maybe because they don't think we will." Confidence had replaced caution. In training camps across England and France, new units studied after-action reports from the Bulge. Instructors emphasized field marksmanship, rapid target transition, and team synchronization, lessons written not by generals, but by frostbitten riflemen who had held the line. Each man was reminded that the Garand was not just a weapon, it was a system built around a human who carried it. The Ordnance Department also took notice. Engineers analyzed reports that rifles had frozen less often than expected, that semi-automatic fire had given units unmatched response time. They refined lubricants, adjusted triggers, and standardized cleaning kits. The M1 Garand became not only the symbol of the American infantrymen, but the living proof of an idea, that industrial genius could elevate every soldier equally. For the Germans, the psychological collapse was impossible to ignore. Captured diaries told of disillusionment spreading through even elite formations. One Waffen-SS sniper wrote, "They shoot without pause. Every time I raise my head, another of us falls. I have stopped believing in training. They have something else, something we can't teach." That something else was not mystique or destiny. It was democracy at war. In the final months of the conflict, as American forces liberated towns from the Ruhr to Bavaria, the contrast between the two armies reached its clearest form. German officers surrendered in disbelief at the sheer number of U.S. soldiers who carried rifles with confidence equal to any sniper. The Americans were not specialists, they were craftsmen of necessity, every man a marksman when the line demanded it. After Germany's surrender in May 1945, Allied intelligence compiled extensive weapons studies. One classified summary read, "The American infantry riflemen, supported by advanced logistics and training, demonstrated fire control efficiency surpassing all Axis equivalents." It was a sterile conclusion, but it hinted at something more profound, that the average soldier, when given the right tools and respect, could outperform the myth of inherited superiority. Meanwhile, in post-war Europe, surviving SS officers attempted to explain their defeat. Some blamed the weather, others the lack of fuel or coordination, but a few, speaking candidly to Allied debriefers, admitted the truth. "We underestimated the Americans," said a lieutenant from the 12th SS Division. "We thought them untrained, mechanical. They fought like professionals." In the U.S., those same professionals quietly returned home. They took their rifles apart one last time, cleaned them, oiled them, and left them in government armories. Many never spoke of what they'd done in the snow. But the military did not forget. The lessons of the Ardennes shaped post-war doctrine, influencing Korea, Vietnam,
and the very concept of the modern rifleman. The idea that precision was no longer an individual art, but a collective skill, began there, in the frozen forests of Belgium. By the time the guns fell silent, the myth that ordinary soldiers could not match elites had been buried beneath the snowdrifts of the Ardennes. The Waffen-SS had prided themselves on precision. The Americans had shown that precision could be democratic. In that truth lay the quiet victory, not just of an army, but of a belief that freedom itself could aim straight. And as Europe thawed beneath the spring sun of 1945, the legend of the elite marksman ended, replaced forever by the calm, unwavering hand of the ordinary man. The snow of the Ardennes has long melted, yet its silence still echoes. Beneath those trees, history rewrote the meaning of strength. It was not medals or ideology that decided the outcome, but patience, skill, and resolve. Qualities found not in elites, but in thousands of ordinary Americans who carried their rifles with quiet purpose. In that frozen forest, a myth died. The belief that precision and courage belonged only to the chosen few, to the elite, to the trained, to the indoctrinated, was shattered by men who had no such illusions. They fought for survival, for one another, for the chance to go home, and in doing so, they outshot an army built on the belief of superiority. What unfolded in the winter of 1944 was more than a military victory. It was the triumph of democracy's greatest weapon, the idea that discipline, courage, and mastery could belong to anyone willing to learn them. The M1 Garand became its instrument, the equalizer of nations, a rifle that gave every soldier the chance to meet the enemy as an equal. For the Waffen-SS, the shock was permanent. They had believed that war favored those born into strength. The Americans showed that strength could be built, methodically, humbly, and relentlessly. In the decades that followed, military historians would call it the end of the old world of war, when armies of privilege yielded to armies of citizens. The Bulge was not just a turning point in the conflict, but in the understanding of modern combat itself. Every trigger pulled in those woods carried a message that reached beyond the battlefield, that freedom, when tested, can aim as straight as any doctrine of power. And as the last veterans of that brutal winter passed into history, one truth endured, that the riflemen who stood in the snow had proven something eternal. Greatness is not born, it is trained, tested, and earned, one shot, one moment, one ordinary soldier at a time.